The courthouse is abuzz with activity as the high-profile trial of the century is about to begin. Saul Goodman, the infamous criminal defense attorney, stands at the front of the courtroom, his sharp eyes scanning the room. Saul, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, today we are here to defend two of the most notorious killers in history, Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, today we are here to defend two of the most notorious killers in history, Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees. These men have been painted as monsters, but I'm here to tell you that the truth is far more complicated. Saul paces back and forth, his voice commanding the attention of the jury. Saul, Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees have been the subject of countless horror movies, their names synonymous with fear and terror. But what if I told you that they are not the true villains in this story? What if I told you that they are the victims, and that the real monsters are the ones who have wronged them? Saul continues, his voice filled with conviction. Saul, Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees have been the subject of countless horror movies, their names synonymous with fear and terror. But what if I told you that they are not the true villains in this story? What if I told you that they are the victims, and that the real monsters are the ones who have wronged them? We see a young Freddy Krueger, a shy and withdrawn child being tormented by his peers. He is bullied, beaten, and ostracized, his cries for help falling on deaf ears. Saul, VO. Freddy Krueger was born into a world of darkness and pain. As a child, he was horribly abused by his father, a drunk and violent man who took out his frustrations on his son. Freddy's mother, a kind-hearted woman who desperately wanted to protect him, was powerless to stop the abuse. Jason Voorhees, on the other hand, was a victim of societal prejudice and ignorance. Born with a severe facial deformity, he was cast out by his own mother and left to fend for himself at the cruel and unforgiving Camp Crystal Lake. The other campers tormented him and the counselors turned a blind eye to his suffering. These men were not born killers. They were victims of a cruel and unjust world, forced to endure unimaginable pain and suffering. And when they finally snapped, when they could no longer take the constant abuse and torment, they lashed out in the only way they knew how, with violence. Freddy Krueger, driven to the brink of madness by his father's abuse, finally snapped and killed the man who had tormented him for so long. But rather than receiving the help and support he so desperately needed, Freddy was arrested, convicted, and sentenced to death.
Jason Voorhees, after years of being shunned and mistreated, finally reached his breaking point. When the cruel counselors at Camp Crystal Lake refused to intervene and stop the abuse, Jason struck back, killing those who had wronged him. But instead of receiving sympathy and understanding, Jason was hunted down and killed, his body left to rot in the lake.
But the story doesn't end there, my friends. You see, Freddy and Jason were not truly dead. Their spirits lived on, haunting the nightmares of those who had wronged them. They became symbols of vengeance, of the oppressed rising up against their oppressors. Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees became the stuff of legend, their names striking fear into the hearts of those who dared to wrong the innocent. They were the ultimate guardians of the downtrodden, the champions of the forgotten and the abused. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I'm not asking you to condone the actions of Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees. What they did was horrible, and no one can deny that. But I'm asking you to understand the context in which they acted, to see them not as monsters, but as victims who were pushed to the brink of madness by a cruel and unjust world. We see a montage of Freddy and Jason exacting their revenge, their victims' screams echoing through the night. Freddy and Jason were not born killers. They were products of a broken system, victims of a society that failed to protect them. And when they finally struck back, they became symbols of the ultimate revenge, of the oppressed rising up against their oppressors. So I ask you, my friends, to look beyond the horror and the fear and to see the humanity in these men, to see the pain and the suffering that drove them to their actions, and to understand that they were not the true villains in this story. The real monsters are the ones who failed to protect the innocent, who turned a blind eye to the abuse and the cruelty that ultimately led to their downfall.
I don't know. It's a compelling argument, but Freddy and Jason are still responsible for all those deaths. But Saul makes a good point. They were victims too, pushed to the brink by a cruel and unjust world. I can't help but feel for them, even if what they did was horrific. Maybe they deserve a second chance.
The jury has reached their verdict. Saul stands before the judge, his face a mask of calm confidence.
In the case of the state versus Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees, the jury finds the defendants not guilty.
A stunned silence falls over the courtroom as the verdict is announced. Saul nods, a small smile playing on his lips. Fade to black.